Welcome to Agent of Wealth Podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps small business owners and retirees overcome the multiple wealth planning challenges involved in your financial life. We do this by creating comprehensive wealth management plans to guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and help create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth planning issues involved in your financial life.
Hello and welcome to the Agent of Wealth with Marc Bautis of Bautis Financial. Today we're talking about using ESG investments to ensure your values are aligned to your portfolio. Good morning, Marc. How are you?
Good morning, Eric. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, fantastic. It's a wonderful day. ESG investments. What does ESG stand for, Marc?
So ESG it's a type of investment. It stands for the E stands for environment, the S stands for social, and the G stands for governance. But before we actually start diving into what that is and why may it or may it not make sense, let's just take a step back, talk a little bit about investing in general. And the way I usually present investing to my clients, I'll say, people think investing, that's everything that, with their finances, and that's the only thing. Mm-hmm. It's really, the way I try and phrase it or utilize it is it's a means to hit your goals. So your investments they're to be used for some purpose. A lot of people will say, well, I want to achieve alpha and I want to beat the market, or I want to beat my benchmark, or I want to, mirror my, get the same returns as my benchmark or mirror my benchmark while doing it with less risk. And then there's some people who just say it's a hobby. It's fun to monitor investments and pick stocks and do that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we're really trying to use these investments to drive our income, our money, our actual, to be able to hit goals with it. Mm-hmm. So, that's really the goal of it. But then what if you could actually invest and have your values, everyone has different values, align with your investments. ESG is a way that, it's one option on how you can do that. And that's what I thought would be a great topic to talk about today.
Yeah, I love values-based investing, and that's kind of what we're talking about. I had not heard the term ESG before, so this is new to me, and I'm excited to kind of dive into it. So where should we start today with this?
Yeah, so actually some of the other names for it previously used to be called socially responsible investing, sustainable investing. But let's even look at how, I mentioned that it's a way that our values we can align our values with our investments. But if you want to look at the three main ways that we can influence change, and this is obviously talking about our values, are that we can throw money at something. We can donate money to a cause, a charity, or even like a political candidate that we think is aligned with what our beliefs and values are. The second way we can influence change is we can protest. And it can be as simple as using a member-owned credit union rather than, a big private bank that may have created fake accounts for their clients. Mm-hmm. Or obviously we know protesting can take a different form too, where it can be more aggressive with it. The third way is through our investments. And, you can take it one step further where, that person who was protesting by not using a certain bank, as a client or a customer, now you can actually come and say, well, I don't want to invest in that particular bank or all banks or essentially anything. You can screen out any value that you have. You can actually, make sure that your investments align to it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think it is so easy for us. Well, not necessarily so easy because we have to do a little bit of research on our own, but it's easier to do this with our wallet, right? And I don't know where that would fall in the three categories you were talking about, but if I'm driving down the street, I have choices of where to shop, right? And I can say, okay, I don't want to shop there, because they do certain things that I don't like. Maybe it's a mechanic that has ripped off a few people, ripped off some of your friends, or they've got some advertising that seems like a bait and switch. They just don't seem real honest, right? And so I'm not going to give my money to that company to change my oil or, change the struts on my car or whatever. I'm going to find a different mechanic that I would rather spend my money with that is doing good things, right? Or is honorable or truthful.
And it's true. And an example that came up recently was there was a gas station that during a recent hurricane that we had, which was just raised the price of gas, and people were saying they were price gouging. And now people said, you know what, I'm never going to go to that gas station again because so that's exactly what you're saying about, influence and change with our wallet. But most people don't realize that you can actually do it with your investments too.
Exactly. Yep.
And we all get these with our investments, these letters in the mail asking us to vote on whether it's a company or a fund, and it'll list different or a variety of topics that we can invest in. However, we may only have a certain small number of shares in our IRA or in our investment account, and you kind of just throw it in the garbage because you say, all right, this really isn't going to do anything at all. Mm-hmm. But where it's gotten to is now you can actually align with other investors with these same values, and all of a sudden now that little amount that you thought was in your IRA that wouldn't have a difference. Now all of a sudden there's you're part of $1 billion fund that actually can influence change, that particular change that you want to. So that's one of the drivers, and we'll talk about a couple more drivers of ESG investing, but that's one of it now where people are feeling, yes, I can actually make a difference with this.
Yeah, absolutely. If everybody could just imagine, if everyone took their investments out of a company that had some labor issues, right? That there was, maybe they have there's some sketchy child labor or labor abuse because they're using other countries, so they're paying them just absolutely garbage wages. They kind of run some sweatshops basically, and it's been proven. We know that. Can you imagine what would happen if every investor said, I'm not going to stand for that? I know they're not in our country. I know that it's not directly in my neighborhood, but that's still wrong. And they took all their investments out of that company. What would that say to that company? Do you think that they may change their labor practices based on that?
Yeah, it will definitely influence them, and we're seeing that where they're being more, they're recognizing, companies are recognizing a lot more that this stuff does matter. And you mentioned, this could be any topic. It could be what they do with their clients' data. That's another one that we're finding is very popular, where companies our data is all over the place. It's where we give all our data to all these companies, and who knows what they do with it. And we're finding out that it's being sold all over the place, and people don't like that. So you have everyone has the ability to vote with our investments on what they do with our data. But I'll go a little bit into what those areas entail. So the E stands for environment, which could take into account things like climate change, water scarcity, pollution and waste, clean tech, renewable energy. So this was, if you go back into when ESG investing started, probably 20 years ago, this was one of the areas that it started with. People would say, I want clean energy, or I'm interested in climate change, and this is what it started with, and kind of what people link it to. But it's gotten more and more, a little bit broader on what the topic it covers. So, like in the social area, you have your labor policies, your relations, product liability. You may not, some company may put out a product that caused harm you don't believe in. An example that we can look at is Monsanto, where people don't like the fact that they're genetically growing this or growing that, and people don't want to invest in that type of company. So if we're using Monsanto as an example, someone can say, I don't want to invest in Monsanto stock. And if you have a portfolio of just individual stocks, it's very easy then to say, okay, we won't purchase Monsanto stock. But funds, whether it's a mutual fund and ETF, have become so prevalent that if Monsanto is part of these larger indexes, it's naturally just going to get in there. And what ESG investing or ESG specific funds allow us to do is filter out those types of investments. So it may be a Monsanto, it may be you don't want an Exxon or Chevron or an oil company in, and now we have the ability to actually filter those out.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we kind of mentioned the how it kind of started the E on the environment, and a lot of times it was political. But it's really grown since then, where it doesn't have to be okay. I'm just aligned on political sides. It could be a cause that you're into. Have some people that are into, or very much into health, nutrition, fitness, And they have come to me and said, I refuse to invest in McDonald's or Coke or Altria or Philip Morris. And we've taken it and said, okay, we will ensure that your investments do not have any of those companies in it. So the way to do it is there's a couple ways that someone can or someone wants to get involved in ESG, or someone can get involved. They may say, they want everything in ESG and they don't care, what it means. They just are so interested in the overall impact of it that they insist that all their investments fall into this ESG criteria. And we'll cover exactly what that is. Some will say they're interested in ESG, but they don't want to sacrifice performance on their investments. And that's usually the first question I get when I talk about the topic with someone is, yeah, it would be great to invest with my values, but is my performance going to take a hit? And we'll talk about some of the common ESG objections. That's obviously the first one that comes up.
Yeah, Mark, I would say absolutely. You and I talked a little bit about this before the podcast, but I work with a lot of groups with faith-based investing or biblically responsible investing. There's two names there. And that is one of the first questions, right? Well, I don't want to sacrifice performance, but the beauty of it is that most of the time you don't have to. I mean, and maybe you'll cover this a little bit more, but a lot of these groups that are putting out these biblically responsible investing funds or the faith-based investing funds or value-based investing funds, they are doing really, really well. And if you think about the mentality of that, the mindset is that if more people are supporting companies that are doing good for the environment, good for social responsibility, good for all these different things that we're talking about today, how much better are those companies going to do when they have more support? And it's almost a trickle down or ripples in a pond kind of thing. And a lot of these funds do as well or outperform other funds that they would normally be in. So yeah, it is definitely an objection that people bring up immediately because they don't want to sacrifice that.
Yeah, and I think the performance question was definitely valid 20 to 30 years ago, because the way ESG investing worked is you would just exclude certain sectors, certain industries, and all of a sudden that would have an impact on performance. But the screenings have gotten so detailed, or so you could really get or screen certain, at the company level, if you want, and even you could screen at the at what your cause level is, and it's gotten to the point now where performance is just as good. The studies that have come out, or the analysis that have come out on these ESG funds, is that you're not going to sacrifice performance by taking an ESG approach. And how we approach it was kind of what you alluded to, is I'll sit down with someone and we'll go through, what's important to you, and, at the specific level. So we'll go through 28 different screens or questions and say, is clean energy important to you? Is, not investing in tobacco important to you? And it doesn't have to be, you can always take the opposite approach too. There are some people who invest in what they call sin stocks, which are the tobacco, the prostitution, the casinos, the gambling. If that's what their cause is, and if that's what they want to do, you're able to do that as well. So it's not just an avoidance type of strategy. If someone wants to include a specific category in, then by all means we can devise a strategy for that. But it's really after going through that profile of what's important, then we figure out what's the best way to put a portfolio together that mimics what their values, or aligns what their values are. And that's how it's approached on my side. So you can get a customized investment strategy that is aligned to your values and not have to sacrifice performance. But like you said,
sorry. Yeah. It's so interesting. I've never heard of the term sin stocks before.
Yeah.
So that makes me chuckle, because I'm thinking somebody's walking into your office thinking, hey, I'd like to invest in a company that beats their workers. Well, how do I find how do I find that company that takes all their used chemical filled water and puts it into in bottles for children.
Yeah.
That's what it brings to mind. I mean, obviously you're not talking about that, but it made me chuckle. I apologize.
Yeah. So I actually haven't had someone come in and say that, but I'm sure that you never know. There may be that person that comes in and says that's important to them and that's what they want to do. You never know.
Yeah.
But the other thing you mentioned too is that companies are now getting aligned with this. So that's why we're seeing, some companies are actually using this as what they think it's going to be a competitive advantage to them, because now the other driver of ESG is data, and all this data. There's a lot more access to data of people that are analyzing companies, analyzing funds. They have access to what a company's carbon footprint is, or what their executive compensation structure is, and it's a lot easier to put a standardized score on a company or a fund and say this is what companies like Morningstar are doing, where they actually have a standardized rating system where they go out and you can look and see this is a company's or a fund's ESG score. And you can make a decision based solely off that ESG score. Either they rate very highly, or they rate very low, or they rate somewhere in the middle. You may have a threshold where you say anyone that doesn't have a score low, anyone that has a ESG score lower than 80, you don't want to invest in. And companies are now saying, well, I don't want to be excluded. What do I have to do to get my number up so that I'll be considered by investors? So the companies are definitely taking notice. And another number that came out was of the ETFs that experienced the most inflow of money this year. The top 3 are all ESG funds. So there's definitely money that's going into it. It's also the institutional money too. So now pensions and some big mutual funds are what's putting money into it. So it's not just your mom and pop investor. It's the entire industry is taking notice of it.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. First of all, I want to just one quick comment. Morningstar is awesome. I mean, it really is. It's an incredibly valuable tool. So that's fantastic, and I know that you utilize that. So that's definitely something that you can do for clients or prospects that are interested in this. So please, if you are interested in what we're talking about and what Marc has presented so far today, reach out to him and his team. Definitely can talk to you about that. Secondly, it is a movement, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that people just don't understand, if they haven't been introduced to ESG or faith-based investing or social responsible investing, it is a movement.
Yeah, and I think we're also seeing a big driver. Some of the big fund companies are getting behind it as well. So you have your BlackRocks, your Vanguards, who, I mentioned it earlier. Now these funds have trillions of dollars behind them.
Exactly.
And a company's not going to take notice if you or I go and say, okay, individually we're going to move, just us are going to move this here or not invest here. But when there's $1 trillion, that's an asset manager can direct where they want to direct. A company's definitely going to listen to them, at least have that conversation with them, and they do have influence. So you did mention it's a movement from the social values side. It's also becoming a movement on the actual investment side. And what I mean by that is one of the investment strategies I like and adhere to is called factor investing. So what it is, it's based on analysis or a study where it concluded that certain factors will outperform the market, and 4 of them include value. So you look at value versus growth, size, meaning that over time small cap stocks have performed better than large caps, volatility. So we want companies that are less volatile but have the same return, and then momentum, which are companies that are growing at a certain pace. What it's being talked about now is that ESG is another type of factor where we might see outperformance over the next period of time, because like we said, companies are going to be more ingrained to it, or more, they're going to take more notice of it, and they're going to change their policies. And you can look at it as well. As we take an example, one of the ESG areas is how a company treats its employees and how they compensate their employees. And I mean, that's just a good thing to treat their employees well. So if you're a company, you're going to take notice and say, okay, maybe I should treat my employees better, because that's not only going to get me on this ESG filter, it'll just help better employees is going to help my company grow. So, you know, you can look at it a lot of different ways, but it is, you know, like you mentioned, there's a movement, there's some momentum behind it. And I'm starting to even get more and more questions about it from clients, you know, where they're saying, is it an option? Is it something that, you know, they can do? Because I think there just wasn't that much coverage of it previously. So you didn't turn on to CNBC and see stories about ESG investing. But now we're starting to see it. I'm hearing more about it. I'm seeing more articles written about it. There's more books on it, more coverage to the media. And that's kind of how movements get started.
You know, Mark, as we've been talking about this, and I've worked with advisors for many, 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 many years. The funny thing is that if somebody walks into some advisor's office, they'll say, I'd like to talk to you about socially responsible investing. And that advisor could easily say, well, hang on just a second. Let me just grab this off my shelf. And they have one thing, right? They have one fund. Yep, I've got one. Yeah. This is the one you want to be in. But they don't talk about what that actually even means, or they don't have the ability to tailor it to somebody. And they think they're being responsible by offering a social responsible fund, or like you said, an ESG option. But it doesn't seem like it should be a one size fits all approach. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with the one size fits all. If someone wants to say, you know what, I just want, you know, to have some ESG overlay in my portfolio, then yes, there are 1, 2, 3, you know, funds that we could put in there, and it will give them some exposure to ESG filters on it. But for most people, there are specific things they care about, and frankly, specific things they don't care about. And from there, that's where we can tailor a specific portfolio, whether it's using individual stocks, not using individual stocks, meaning that we can do the screens both ways on what gets excluded or what gets included. And we can do that via stocks and funds. The funds have gotten so specific that if you want to just include a certain, you know, subset of ESG, then we can do that. But, you know, someone might care about clean energy, someone might care about gender diversity, someone might care about cybersecurity, and they don't want to invest in any companies that have been hit with cybersecurity breaches or have been known to be lax with customer data. And you know, I think that's one of the good things about you know, talking to someone like me, is that we can actually tailor a very specific customized approach with it. And also, and you know, I'm going to go back to it, because it is the number one thing that comes up anytime this topic comes up, is the approach we can ensure that we're not sacrificing performance on it. So yeah, you know, the way I would recommend it is, and what happens is we all have our investment statements, and we look at it and we see these funds in there, and you know, it's a lot easier to tell if we have individual stocks, but we look at these funds and we don't even know what are in these funds.
Exactly. Yep.
So one of the areas that I can help is really do an X-ray on, you know, a specific fund. And we can look at someone's statement and we can look at a specific fund and we can say, okay, these are the holdings in this. And we can actually filter out where if someone says, well, you know, I refuse to invest in any oil company, we can look and we can say, well, 2.3% of this fund is invested in, you know, these 6 oil companies. And then what we can do is, if they insist, well, this is important, I don't want to invest in any oil company, we can you know, put together either a fund or a basket of stocks where we ensure that no oil companies are included in them. And you know, from there, that's how you get that tailored investment approach. So I offer, you know, sitting down with anyone and going through their statements, going through the investments in there, doing that analysis, and also letting them know what their options are after we do that analysis, after we have that visibility or transparency into what they're investing in. You know, we'd go through what is important to them, and we see how it aligns. And if it doesn't align, you know, what are their options on getting that aligned?
Yeah, absolutely. And people do need to sit down with you and do this, because when the stuff was hitting the fan, literally, about tobacco, and this is, you know, quite a few years ago when it really, really started to hit the fan as far as big tobacco being held accountable for the things that they'd put out there, the chemicals, the cancer that was happening, so on and so forth. One of the largest tobacco companies changed their name, and they can call it branding if they want to, but they don't go by that name that they really changed it to. But they changed it for the purpose of changing their ticker symbol as well.
Right.
because now it people wouldn't recognize that. If it's in a portfolio, you would have no idea what that company name is, but you would recognize them by the name they previously used. So maybe it's a quote unquote, I'm using air quotes that you can't see on a podcast. It could be a coincidence, but come on, that's strategic planning. When stuff's hitting the fan and all of a sudden you want to change your name so people don't recognize you in a portfolio, that's pretty obvious. Yeah. So, I mean, people definitely need to seek out professional counsel to be able to go through their investments. And Mark, if that's you, which I hope it is, because you are very diligent in the research you do and the things you do for your clients, how do they reach you?
Yeah. So the best way is to go to my website, bautisfinancial.com. And there'll be a link in the top right-hand corner that says schedule a call, and I'll have a free consultation and we can talk about ESG investing or any type of investing topic. We mentioned all the ESG topics, but there's a fourth category of person that says, I just don't care about this. So, everyone's going to fall into those, 4 categories of where ESG is important to them or where it fits in. And we can go through it and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep. And just one more note on Mark and how he works with his clients. There is absolutely no judgment. If you call him up and say, hey, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to avoid, or you may be that person, like you said at the end, you call him up and say, I'd like to talk to you, but I just don't care. I don't care what I'm invested in. There is no judgment there. He puts the client first, your needs, and he'll discuss it with you and talk to you about it and see what you want to do and help to make that happen. So again, that's definitely something I wanted to get across to you. So you reach out to him. And I want to thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Mark comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And if you've had this discussion with some friends or coworkers or family about what your values are, share this with them so they can hear that there's somebody out there that will listen to them and the values that they want to ensure that they're invested in, and they've got somebody that they can contact. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Bautis Financial, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment and financial planning.